right.
Please give a warm welcome to Nick.
So,
Just one more thing. I will be holding questions till the end of the session. Okay.
How are we? All right. So before I begin, I recognize a few faces in here. How many of you guys have heard of Software Carpentry before? And yeah. And who knows what Software Carpentry does? Cool. Yeah, exactly. And who's a Software Carpentry instructor? That's what I thought. Okay. So today I'm just going to go through a little bit of what Software Carpentry is and what we do, what's happened in Australia this year, what you learn in the Instructor Training course, and as well as what ResBears is and how you can get involved, and then what Software Carpentry has done worldwide. And if I've got time, I'll talk about some experimentation that we're doing across the organization. So, what is Software Carpentry? Software Carpentry is a not-for-profit organization, and the goal is to help scientists who have a little bit of coding knowledge that's usually self-taught consolidate their knowledge through a formal training from essentially the ground up. So the first workshop we taught was in 1998. It was based off a paper written in 1996 or so. It sort of trundled along a little bit. It got to 2010. They rebooted the organization and changed up the workshop format. And then since then, it's been supported by the Sloan Foundation and Mozilla, and it's now its own independent nonprofit. So essentially what we do is we hold two full day workshops. We have instructors who have been trained in the arts and magic of teaching, or at least been given an introduction to that. And we have a set curriculum with some external bits around that. So essentially the core topics of the curriculum are automating things using the Unix shell, so your bash and your make. I've seen make an appearance, but it's not necessarily core. Structured programming in either Python, R, or Matlab. Obviously, here focus is on Python, so I'll mostly talk about that. And version control using Git or Mercurial. I think Subversion as well if someone is particularly inclined, but mostly Git or Mercurial. So up to 2015, we had our first workshop in Australia at Macquarie University in 2013. And then over 2013, 2014, we had some 17 workshops across the country. Most of those were in Melbourne, a few up the East Coast, one in Adelaide, one in Tasmania. There's also New Zealand, and I put it on that map at someone's suggestion so I don't end up on worldmapswithoutnewzealand.com. But I don't know as much about the New Zealand courses, and I have to apologise to any New Zealanders in the room for that. In 2015, we've had 21 workshops this year alone, over 3 states, including our first in Perth. And I've lost my presenter view, which is really not very helpful. Sorry, guys. Hey. So 21 workshops compared to the 16 in the 2 years leading up to that. We've had our first instructor training course onshore. We've formed a partnership with the Research Bazaar conference, and I'm informed, reliably, that we have the most workshops per capita in, quote, the known universe. So let's take a look at the instructor training course. It's run over 3 days, or this one was run over 3 days in February, and it was a prelude to the Research Bazaar conference at Melbourne University. We had a guy called Bill Mills from the Mozilla Software Lab, or Mozilla Science Lab, sorry, come over and effectively run a 3-day workshop in, again, the arts and crafts of teaching software or software development. We've also got Damien Irving, who is essentially, I'm standing in place of Damien today. He would normally do this talk. He's done this talk a couple years running, and he's had a lot to do. In fact, I'd say he's practically run software carpentry in this country. So he was a big part of organising that and the ResBears conference. And effectively, what we cover, and I won't list them all, but I'll go through some of the big ones. So I'll start with cognitive development and concept mapping. Essentially, this is developing our training so that we match the way that learners think and learners learn. So we do that by, it's a lot of preparation. You go through the content you're working over and you break it into chunks so that you match how how short-term memory works. So we've all heard, or I hope most of us have heard, that you can essentially only store 7 items of knowledge in your short-term memory at any given point in time. And we have to build our instruction such that we match that 7-item limit. We can do that by building our concept maps, and you can see an example of a concept map up here. You take lots of different, somewhat related items, and in your preparation, you build how you'll relate those for your learners, so that they can hopefully build up those relationships themselves. One big thing that we do sort of to help with that chunking is live coding. Live coding is really important when you're teaching because it slows you down, so no one is trying to catch up the whole time, and it also proves that you're fallible. Because it's come up a few times yesterday and this morning as well. If your learners don't understand that you're fallible, then they will become discouraged when they themselves fail. So to see their instructor every now and then stuff up is really helpful for their learning. We also reinforce our concepts through repetition. Peer instruction I'll brush over. Essentially the idea is that all novices misunderstand their learning at first, but everyone misunderstands it differently. And so the idea is that we can then have them work together and, as a group, help each other with their misunderstandings. We don't use it a lot, we use it a little. It's been proven elsewhere to be a really fantastic technique and we learn it. I'm hoping to use it more. And finally, not finally, but the final one I'll cover is learning to teach. So the big part that we have emphasized is preparation. And I saw that yesterday as well. There's a lot of time before the actual learning part where you put into your lesson design. And I think, Thea, you said yesterday, most of your time was spent developing lessons for PyCharm, in your case. In our case, it's sitting down, going over the lessons that have already been prepared for us and are openly available on the internet, and breaking that down, writing notes, etc., so that we know how we're going to build that lesson plan, or how we're going to introduce our learners to those concepts and how they can then build those those concept maps in their own mind. The other thing that we've done, and I'll certainly be doing with this presentation, is watching yourself teach on video. It's a really horrifying thing to do at the time. I hate it. I'm going to watch this video. I'm going to hate it. I'm going to hate that I just looked at the camera like that. I'm going to hate that I've spent so much time talking about this, but at the same time, it helps me learn. And by learning to be a better teacher, I can then teach my learners more effectively. I'll hate that too. So, ResBears. I said earlier, ResBears was the conference that we had our training session in preparation for. The reason we had a training session leading straight into the conference was because the conference had a huge amount of workshops on. And effectively what ResBears is, and I'm going to quote here, it's a community of researchers who believe in open, reproducible research. And so the role that software carpentry plays in that is that we can help, using structured programming methods, we can help scientists learn to do reproducible and open research. And especially with Git and source control in general, we can help them build collaborative, open, reproducible research. So there were essentially 6 major topics at ResBears. The first was R and Python, or the first 2 were R and Python. We also had Matlab and the Natural Language Toolkit. And then we had sort of some different ones, not so programming ones, in mapping and computer-aided design. And I know they had a workshop that was in a workshop using 3D printers and art cutters and all sorts of cool stuff. In 2016, they're taking it outside of, well, not taking it outside of Melbourne, but they're broadening it across the world. And this is really impressive. 2015 was the first year they've ever done this conference. In 2016, it's going to be conducted in 8 sites in Australia and New Zealand, 2 sites in the USA, and 2 in the UK, which is really fantastic given that it's an idea that came out of Melbourne University, and you know it's growing really quite rapidly, and that's good because it's a fantastic sort of an idea, and it's one that Software Carpentry is really happy, I think, to be part of. So software carpentry in the world, there are 4 big things that have happened this year. The first one I sort of mentioned earlier, Software Carpentry has spun out and it's its own non-profit foundation now. We've set up a concept called data carpentry. We've expanded the curriculum, or we're working on expanding the curriculum, and we're working on publishing our lessons. So the Software Carpentry Foundation is now a USA 501c3 non-profit. So you know, donations are tax deductible, that's really cool. And it coordinates the development of the core software carpentry lessons. It holds the IP rights, the trademarks, all of that, I guess, administrative stuff that helps everyone else in the organization do their jobs and teach people. Individual memberships are effectively determined by contribution. So by giving 2 lessons in any 12-month period or doing other contributions to the organization, the board effectively determines you are a member. Organizational members are done by a subscription. So any money that Software Carpentry takes in is effectively used to further our lesson development and hopefully do some cheaper or free lessons for non-profits and other organizations that maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it. And they're currently hiring. So we're looking for an executive director of Software Carpentry. It doesn't say you have to be anywhere in particular. The job description says you can be anywhere in the world and do this job. I think it's really exciting because it means we've got to a certain point in the development of the organization. So Data Carpentry. Data Carpentry is a sister organization now of Software Carpentry. It teaches basic concepts, skills, and tools for working with data. And that's for scientists who maybe don't have any programming experience at all. So they start with spreadsheets and they move up from there. And it's good, spreadsheets are good because you can then teach the limitations of spreadsheets, and this is why you should use Python or R rather than sticking with spreadsheets. And people who discover spreadsheets on their own generally tend to, hey, now I've got everything I want. And they never move on to something that's more open and more collaborative. The difference between software carpentry and data carpentry is exactly that. Scientists who are self-taught and have used programming a little bit belong in software carpentry for the most part. Those who have not done much at all belong with data carpentry probably. That's not to say that software carpentry can't help someone who's never touched programming, but that's sort of what we're aiming the two at. How am I doing for time? 10, 15 minutes? Cool. All right, so there's been a reasonably major adjustment of the lesson formats. Coming, it's not there yet. There's a discussion around how we format our lessons. So for those of you who aren't familiar at all with software carpentry, the way it works is we have a GitHub. And on GitHub are all of our lessons. So that's everything from R, Python, and the shell, and not just beginner stuff. There's some intermediate stuff on there as well. In Python, we're rapidly expanding that. So there's now material on pandas. There's material on modularizing your code. There's material on defensive programming, and there's some stuff in there on parallel programming as well. So that's open to anyone to use. And what we're doing is obviously looking to expand that, but also we're looking to change the way. And I have to admit, I'm not 100% clear on what the end goal is, but we're working on changing the formatting of it all, so that it makes more sense to both the people who are going through it by themselves and for instructors who are working on understanding it and breaking it down, like I said, preparing. And yeah, one of the biggest things is that we're now introducing these intermediate tracks, which is really cool. Lesson publication. Lesson publication sounds, how do I go about this? Essentially what lesson publication means is we're assigning DOI numbers to all of our lessons. And then the main contributors to those lessons, or the editors of those lessons, get listed as an editor on the DOI record. And at that point, those lessons can be cited appropriately. So in academia, especially those contributors who are academics, now have those lessons, or will have very shortly, those lessons listed as papers that can be cited and that go onto their academic record, which is really cool, and gives some credit to our editors who really deserve it. And finally, well, not finally, I'm going to go back a bit, but there are two big bits of experimentation that we've done this year. One's maybe coming off, one hasn't. The one that hasn't come off is corporate workshops. So I'm not an academic, and I'm not the only instructor in software carpentry that's not an academic. Most are, some aren't. And what we've looked at doing is workshops for the corporate sphere. We said, okay, it's not what we generally do, but we'll try it. And we piloted, I think, 3 to 4 corporate workshops, and they didn't work. So what we're essentially saying, there's lots of other people in the corporate space that do training, and we're focusing on the academic scientist sphere for now. The other one is remote instruction. And essentially that means we can, what we have is a problem where our instructors tend to be localized to, in Australia, the East Coast, for example, and worldwide, a few, you know, US, UK, and Australia. There are obviously some spread throughout Europe, but there's an instructors mailing list, and all the time we get workshops that come up that say, hey, we need an instructor in country. We're willing to fly you from, you know, anywhere in the US to this place, and it gets quite expensive quite quickly. And so what we're experimenting with is remote instruction. It's a little early to say whether or not it's worked yet. That's all the material that I have prepared straight off the bat. I do have more on what we learn in instructor training sessions, so I'll go back to that. But first, I just want to point out that you guys can actually help. There's instructors in the room, they know. But there are instructor training sessions coming up, and I've got those on the next slide. You can contribute to the lessons. Like I said, they're all on GitHub, and you're more than welcome to submit pull requests to those lessons. And one of the big things, and I'm going to cover it before I get a question about it, is all of our lessons are for Python 2. And the reason for that is that until very recently, we'd made the determination that that most scientific libraries weren't available for Python 3 yet, and so we would stick to teaching what we knew worked. We've very recently, in the last 3 months, I think, the issue came up on GitHub, said we're ready now. We think Python 3 has been ready for a while. We can start teaching this to scientists because the material is all there. So one of the big things that's happening now is we're converting our lessons to Python 3. That's still going. So a really easy first problem for someone is to go through lessons, or the Python lessons, and convert code. It's little things. It's print statements, for example, to Python 3. Now, instructor training. Again, sort of in preparation for big ResBears this year, we have live instructor training coming up. And obviously on the slides, we've got Brisbane, Melbourne, and in Auckland. That's really exciting. I did know, but don't remember, sorry, who's coming over. But we've got international instructors coming in to teach those, which is really kind of cool. So in terms of some takeaways from today, and like I said, I'm going to go back and talk a little bit more about what we learned in instructor training, because that was my you've talked too quickly and now you need to make up some time thing. But essentially there are a couple key takeaways. The first one is software carpentry is getting really big now, and you know we've doubled the amount of lessons that we've been able to offer. A big part of that is because we've now got way more instructors in the country out of February, and we'd really like more so we can continue to build what we're doing. So on that note, you too can be an instructor. You know, the instructor training course is really valuable by itself, and actually instructing, I'm informed, is really quite valuable, a valuable experience, and it looks really good on a resume for anyone who's coming out of uni, and it's a really enjoyable process for anyone who's in academic or professional work. The other thing is that ResBears is awesome, and ResBears is awesome. It's fun, it's exciting, it's getting it's grown amazingly in 12 months, or less than 12 months, 6 months. And if you're at an educational, or if you're at a university, you too can have a ResBears, because they're essentially giving the materials to anyone who, well, not to anyone, but if you're the first person in a city who can get institutional backing behind a ResBears conference in your city, the conference organizers are really going to get behind that and help you out. So going back a little bit, so I've been through cognitive development and concept mapping, and that to me is one of the most important things. Actually, what I might do, have I got 5 minutes? Cool. Where is it? Right, so this is the lessons that are up on Software Carpentry. And you can see here we've got programming with Python, programming with R, programming with Matlab, which is really cool. And what they come with is obviously the repos, which is awesome. Site itself. So this is what the programming with Python lessons look like. And essentially the introductory one, you're going through introductory data analysis. It's an information data set. It's as good as any other. And what we have as well is an instructor's guide. And it's not complete. It's not. I think it actually offers some real value in terms of, especially you guys who are the instructors. I think we all need to jump on here and add notes as we go. So we have these instructor programs. And also the GitHub. So this is where the Software Carpentry GitHub lives. We've got make lessons. And it's all Markdown. Let's see if I can find the, okay, NumPy lesson, sure, why not? It's all Markdown. And you can go ahead and edit that, make a pull request, and if the maintainers think it's a valuable pull request, then of course they'll allow it themselves. I think I'm probably done talking about Software Carpentry for now, unless you guys have got any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Nick? Wait a second, I'm coming over.
Mentioned that the private sector was a failure. What happened and why?
That's a really good question. Essentially, I spoke to Greg Wilson about this. Greg Wilson's the current exec director. And the idea that I got was that it was because there's competition in that space. As a not-for-profit, it's not what we aimed our lessons at, and it's not something that we needed to get into. There's other people doing that. They aim their lessons at the corporate sector, and they make money doing that. Whereas we're not looking to make money doing that, except to support our other efforts. And our lesson material and all of our instructors, or most of our instructors, come from the academic background. So there's not a huge motivator there either. So.
Do you charge participants to attend a workshop?
Yes. So the way it works is there's a reasonably nominal administration fee, and the way I've heard of it working in both ways. So you can either have the organisation pays it all up front, and then people go for free, or you charge each person. I think it's roughly, help me out, $40 a person, give or take. A little bit more. So it's not much for a 2-day training course. And the thing that we found that getting people to pay does is it makes them rock up. Otherwise you get, I think there's some numbers around, 30% dropout if you don't have them pay, whereas 5% I think if you have them pay.
I'm a primary school teacher teaching computer programming. Would it be worth my while coming along to a session like this to learn how to teach Python, I guess?
Python, yeah, sure. Yes is the very short answer. Yes is the short answer. I learned a lot. I don't have an educational background, but a lot of what they teach is not just the pedagogy of it all, but which you would have training in, obviously, but how it applies then to the coding, which is, and that's why it's a valuable thing, whether or not, if you're a teacher, it's valuable because of that bit. If you're a coder, it's valuable because you get the pedagogy of it all. So, yeah.
Sorry. What kind of expectation? How much knowledge would I need of Python or something like that, or could I come in with very beginners?
Very beginner. One of the things that we had emphasized is that you don't actually need to know a whole lot more about what you're teaching than what you're teaching. one, in our particular case, because we have the lesson materials there. So if you understand the lesson materials and you've gone through that and you've read through them, then you understand enough to teach what you're trying to teach. But the other thing is, I've forgotten where I was going to go with that. Sorry. Effectively, yeah, because we have the lesson materials and you've broken that down first, you know everything you need to know.
Any further questions, we'll just get answer some other time because we've got to move on. But I'd like you all to give Nick a huge round of applause while I present him with a mug.
Thank you.